Good morning and welcome to a special Sunday edition of the NYNJPA weather forecast discussion video. I'm meteorologist Stephen DiMartino, and boy do we have a lot to talk about this morning. This is our current surface map, and as you can see, high pressure, polar cold high pressure, is in control over much of the northern mid-Atlantic. This is going to prevent any other potential rain or snow showers that could have potentially impacted the northern mid-Atlantic. The reason why we have high pressure is because we have strong subsidence over the region. Why? Well, we have a very powerful coastal storm starting to develop off the northern mid-Atlantic coastal waters, and that storm, as we can see that low pressure around 1012 millibars, is going to intensify, and it's going to back its way towards the mid-Atlantic coast. And when it does that, it's going to produce some rather stormy conditions for much of the New York City and portions of the Philadelphia metropolitan area. Let's take a look at the water vapor satellite picture. Now, I've been saying for days, keep an eye on the western Atlantic. Why? What's going to be the remnants of Hurricane Tomas is starting to work into the upper level trough that is starting to develop off the mid-Atlantic coast. First, let's take a step back here. We have our polar jet stream in blue. Notice how it's starting to arch back over parts of New England. That's because we have a strong ridge that's developed over the central Atlantic. Not exactly a negative NAO block as what's textbook that we normally see, but a block nonetheless that slows down the entire pattern. So we have that in store, set up. We have our subtropical jet stream with our nice ridge over the plains, and also a nice trough, and that trough off the Atlantic is starting to draw in the moisture and energy of Hurricane Tomas into the polar disturbance that is developing now over the mid-Atlantic coast. Now, here's basically what I'm expecting. The moisture and the energy from Tomas is going to be drawn into this upper level disturbance. And the clash of air masses, the very warm tropical air mass that's associated with Tomas, and the cold, you can feel it outside, it's rather chilly, cold polar air mass that is also a dry air mass is going to clash with this warm air mass. And when you have that type of clash, you get an intense storm. Why is this important? Well, I'm sure you've been hearing on other various weather locations of a nice warm-up for the northern Atlantic. And I've been saying no. The reason why is because that storm that's going to develop off the New Jersey coast and off the New England coast is going to prevent this ridge from moving east. It's basically going to knock it down. So what's going to happen is that all that warm air that is situated over the Ohio Valley, never going to reach us. We'll be stuck in the 50s. It'll be rather cool, at times cloudy and rainy along the immediate coast, but there will be no significant warm-up for the northern Atlantic this week. In fact, we'll get back to near normal temperatures and then another cool down, which I'll show in just a moment. Let's take a look at the model. Okay, this is 500 millibars on the 12Z NAM. Notice by Monday afternoon, that's tomorrow, our strong upper level low is now situated. Look at the ridge. It's being knocked down, forced south. It's not going to be able to influence our weather conditions. As a result, look for the immediate coast, especially for Long Island, New Jersey coast, parts of southern Connecticut, variable clouds, scattered showers. When those showers move in, when that rain moves in, it will be heavy at times, especially in the afternoon and evening hours. It's not going to be a complete washout, but it's going to be kind of like in waves of rain moving from New England down through New York City and over the New Jersey coast. Further to the west, not so bad. The reason why is because the lifting is weaker over parts of eastern Pennsylvania, around the Delaware River Valley, so the showers would be more isolated in nature, variable clouds, and a bit windy conditions. And notice that the surface map at the same time on the NAM, our area low pressure initially develops over New England. The reason why it's doing that is because that's where the best lifting is when this upper level low initially forms. Eventually, this storm will become what we call vertically stacked. The surface low and the upper low are basically sitting over each other. That's when the storm reaches an apex in strength and then starts to weaken. But before that, the winds start to increase, especially on the coast. Look for winds from the northwest going to the northeast and back to the northwest again, anywhere from 15 to 30 miles per hour along the coast. Further inland, I'm looking more about 10 to 20, more closer to 10 as you move further west. Again, if you're on the immediate coast, watch out for coastal flooding, watch out for strong winds, and of course heavy rain. So we move forward into Tuesday. Notice the upper level low hasn't really moved positions much. The ridge is still stuck where it's at, which means that the warm air still is locked in the Ohio Valley and parts of the Tennessee River Valley. The northern mid-Atlantic is in a northwesterly flow, which is a rather cool flow. Meanwhile, a deep trough is starting to develop over the west, typical of a La Nina pattern and a positive EPO pattern. Our surface low continues to intensify. The pressure is not as impressive by Tuesday afternoon because the storm has reached its apex. It's not as intense, but still windy conditions can be still expected. So basically the worst windy conditions can be expected tomorrow night into tomorrow morning, slacking off thereafter. We move into more of a northwesterly wind after Tuesday afternoon, which is great news because that limits the coastal flooding. If this low pressure was sitting, let's say, off the North Carolina or Virginia coast, New Jersey and Long Island would have a serious problem. But because the storm is forming a little bit further north, not as bad as far as the coastal flooding. Still going to be an issue, and like I said, still not going to warm up. Now we transition to the European model guidance, again from the Penn State EWOL, an excellent website for model guidance. Notice again, our upper level low is stuck over the western Atlantic, which keeps that ridge to the west of the northern Atlantic. So we are remaining in a north to northwesterly flow. Our deep trough over the west starts to transition east, and keep an eye on what happens with this ridge as we move forward. By Thursday evening, the ridge is starting to lose its magnitude a bit. Sure, it's starting to move east, but it's not nearly as impressive as it was. The heights are starting to decrease. Meanwhile, our ridge over the Pacific is starting to shift into the west coast. Our trough that is sitting over the west is now transitioning towards the plains, and we're starting to get cold air dumping into the northern plains. Our upper level low is still sitting off the coast, and what does that mean for the surface? Well, it basically means that high pressure is going to be locked in over the St. Lawrence River Valley. Our coastal storm is going to continue to intensify and sit over the Atlantic, and that produces a northerly flow over much of the northern Atlantic. So New York City and Philadelphia, instead of having a southwesterly flow, because our high pressure center is not located over the southern mid-Atlantic and southeast, it's located to the north of us, which means cold air or cooler air is funneling south into the northern Atlantic. So instead of 60s, it's more like lower to mid 50s. So as we move towards Saturday, well, look at this ridge. It's significantly knocked down and it's rather progressive. Our upper level low is still sitting off the mid-Atlantic and New England coast. Our ridge is nowhere near as amplified, and in fact, the ridge axis is still to the west of the northern Atlantic, which means we're still in this weak northwesterly flow. Notice the convergence and confluence is sitting over the St. Lawrence River Valley aloft. That means high pressure is going to remain to the north of the northern Atlantic, not to the southeast. Big difference in the way that the air mass is set up then. This means that we have a cooler air mass over New England and the northern mid-Atlantic, not a warm one. And, may I also add, that our trough is starting to progress to the east. Our ridge is building into the west coast. It's not a true positive PNA pattern, which you usually look for major cold outbreaks, but it is clearly a strong positive EPO pattern that's shifted to the west. And what that causes is that cold air drives into the plains. Gee, this sounds like my winter forecast quite a bit, doesn't it? And so by the end of the week, what we have in place is that we have a polar air mass that is driving into the northern Atlantic. Our warm air mass is sitting over the southeast. We get a storm track that is basically cutting from the plains into the Ohio Valley and off the mid-Atlantic coast. So we'll be in this boundary area. So look for scattered clouds. I'm expecting a generally dry week after Tuesday because we're going to be in an area of subsidence. So for most locations, it'll remain dry, but it's going to be a very active, dynamic week and setting up the pattern for the second half of November. Now, how is that looking? Let's take a look at the negative NAO potential. Thank you for trusting in NYNJPA Weather as your weather source for the northern mid-Atlantic. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you tomorrow.